have the stereograph of homecoming parade for the Harlem Hellfighters. And the Harlem Hellfighters were one of our most decorated units in World War I, and since this program theoretically will be airing the day after the actual November 11th Armistice Day that ended the, quote, war to end all wars, on November 12th, that Monday, hopefully this program will be on the air. So, welcome to another edition of Media Watch, folks. Despite this cold opening, we'll probably transition to Raymond, Peterson, and myself. And I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And we open with that homecoming for the Harlem Hellfighters because in November, I believe they came home February, the first iteration of the 369th Regiment, which went over as the New York 15th, but was renamed the 369th while they were fighting over there. They came home in a sort of victory celebration, and then they marched up Fifth Avenue, Raymond, and were the first units to actually have a homecoming victory parade up the streets of New York. And they marched straight up Fifth, crossed over at the 110th Street Harlem southern border demarcation, and then walked up Lenox Avenue in celebration of their great exploits in the First World War.
Was there any particular order to the way troops were brought back? Were they among the first? Were they among the last?
I'm pretty sure they were among the first, and I'm not sure what the reasoning was for the War Department on how they brought those troops home. One possibility of those guys coming home earlier than most was because they were on the front lines longer than any other fighting unit. They were on the front line in those trenches for 191 days. I believe it was 6 months.
6 months?
I believe it was 6 months.
Quite
and
a
they were one of the most decorated units to fight in World War I. And actually, we're talking about these guys because it's not just the anniversary of World War I's ending. You know, 11/11/11, I think was when they signed the armistice for the end World War I in 1918. So this year is the 100th anniversary. But they experienced such racial discrimination that I was reminded about it because I think either you or somebody brought to my attention, Bob, who's on assignment somewhere, Bob Anthony, reminded me that the African burial ground monument to the colonial Africans in New York was defaced. When we aired, it's about a week ago, there was a press conference last Monday, because if we're airing on the Monday where we should be November 12th, it would have been the previous Monday, 7 days earlier, that a lot of elected officials had a news conference because there was a rash of racial vandalism that took place. The African Burial Ground Monument was, what was it, kill
the
N-word, and which defaced the plaque in front of the burial ground. I'm not sure whether they did anything to Lorenzo Pace's Triumph of the Spirit major sculpture in Foley Square. I didn't see anything to that effect.
Photos or video of that, and I think that would have been covered had it been defaced.
Yeah, and so right after that, there was graffiti scrawled a few days later in a Brooklyn Synagogue after the defacement of the African Burial Ground Monument. So this documented rise in anti-Semitism and racial hate crimes and incidents, you might want to call it. But of course, the shooting in the synagogue 2 weeks ago was not an incident. That was a major tragedy.
Murder.
And so it's interesting because we are pre-taping 2 days after the midterm elections, and the occupant of the White House spent the last month telling more lies to try to get Republicans elected in midterm election than he told in the previous accumulation of months of lying. And it served him to good extent during the Senate races, because I think the Republicans picked up a couple of extra seats in the Senate. but the Democrats were able to take control of the House. So fear, because fear of the caravan was his major boogeyman coming up the southern border to attack you and take your jobs and maybe rape you.
Well, that's the way to motivate people. Get them frightened about something and convince them that you're the only one that can do something about it.
Well, yeah, maybe it was successful. I don't know.
Well, so far he's been very successful. Now you were talking about...
Well, about the House, I'd say, yeah, maybe. No, not quite, because... but about the Senate, yeah, I guess he was successful.
Going back to the 369th now, they were highly decorated. They were decorated by the French as well, and now what award was it that they were given? That was like the highest.
Yeah, I like to try to the French Croix de Guerre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Croix de Guerre.
The Guerre. Yeah. The piece that I actually wrote to deal with this anniversary starts out like this. I'm going to quote it just because it gets to the heart of the matter. 100 years after the end of the war to end all wars, veteran broadcast journalist, documentarian, and U.S. veteran Eric V. Tait Jr., yours truly, folks, pens a highly personal remembrance of one of the most decorated units of World War I. And I start out, over the past 2 years, as a proud black veteran and journalist, I have tried to come to terms with this. The commander-in-chief of our armed forces is a bone-spur, draft-dodging, self-proclaimed sexual assaulter who's unabashedly sympathetic to white supremacists and neo-Nazis. This president of the United States of America catapulted himself into office, insulting and demonizing black and brown people.
You're being a little vague there.
Now calls the free press the enemy of the people, and continually assaults and undermines constitutional norms and the rule of law. Really hard to accept. But you know what? Presto. On closer reflection, had I been a patriotic young black man in Harlem in the same time period 100 years ago, what I would have faced then could well have been equally, if not more, distressing. The worst period, the actual nadir of race relations in the country since the halcyon days of the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. A president, Woodrow Wilson, so racist he was quoted at least 3 times in D.W. Griffith's lavish film paean to the Ku Klux Klan, Birth of a Nation. A president so in love with the KKK and the Confederacy's lost cause, he made Birth of a Nation the first film ever screened at the White House. A president so reluctant about possibly depleting the white race, he hesitated to commit the U.S. to the defense of democracy and the free world in the First World War, but also reluctantly allowed blacks to be drafted into a segregated U.S. Army for possible service in that war. So 2018 is almost like a reflection of 1918 time period, when the 369th, just like all black folks who've done for 400 years, do their patriotic duty and protect and defend the country and the Constitution.
Does not defend them.
They know they're doing this for a country that basically is not really trying to give them equal protection under the laws. And when the 369th went over, folks, and this is something that I don't want to harp on, but it's a reflection of what's going on in today's society, all these rising hate crimes, all these racist incidents. The American Expeditionary Forces, who they were supposed to be fighting with and under, did not want to fight with them. And so they basically assigned them to the French government and the French army. And so the 369th ended up fighting under the French flag initially. And they were so great that they were the first 2 Croix de Guerre won by any Americans, 2 guys from the 369th. Needham and Jackson, Robinson, I forget. I've got them in the article. I should call them up. By the time they had finished fighting, they had had 2 medals of honors from the U.S. government. They had Legion of Merits, and about 171 for all the gear for the men of the unit. But the most dastardly thing about that whole incident was the U.S. Army Expeditionary Forces put out a pamphlet.
I know you were telling me this
to
earlier. And,
the French people and the French government. It wasn't the German enemy that put out this propaganda pamphlet. It was our own U.S. American Expeditionary Forces, and they labeled the 369 black troops as inferior and told the French people that they had these, quote, rapist tendencies and all kinds of negative crap about what would become one of the most decorated units to fight in World War I. And those guys took that crap and then went off and just never lost a piece of ground, never had one of their guys taken prisoner, got captured, but they snatched him right back. Never taken prisoner. So when I tell you about these guys and how extraordinary they were, it's too bad that we don't know more about them, but we're trying to use this show to help change that.
There were also a number of black fighter pilots flying with the Lafayette Espadrille in France.
Well, I know that there was a guy by the name of Clyde Bullard who flew.
I think he's probably the most famous. His name is out there.
For the French.
Right.
And I believe, I'm not sure if she actually flew in the war, but Bessie Coleman was one of the early black female pilots. I'm not sure she went to war. Let me not say that. But she was probably one of the first female pilots of all races.
Didn't she do mail delivery for
She
a
may
time?
have. There's a whole biography of Bessie Coleman that somebody I think is trying to make into a major feature motion picture, and it's well deserved.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
But yeah. The defacement of the African Burial Ground Monument and the echoes of all these anti-Semitic bombs and pipes thrown through synagogue glasses and graffiti scrawled in there, not to mention the 2 weeks ago shooting of the synagogue. It's just unbelievable. And so in the lead up to, or the post-World War I tenor of the times, because when those guys came back from the war, a whole bunch of them ended up getting shot and lynched while in uniform, just trying to exercise their rights. But because they came back not willing to take any guff, and because the rest of the black population was so tired of how bad racial things had gotten, and because they were tired of white mobs invading their communities and burning and looting and threatening them, in 1919 it became known as the Red Summer of 1919, because when those white mobs entered those black communities, they got met with all kinds of resistance and gunfire. And so there were riots all across the North and the South in 1919. As folks that had it, they said no more of this.
Some very serious.
Quite bloody. That's why
Oklahoma.
I don't know what the phrase was. The red summer of 1919, the bloody summer of 1919. But the bottom line was, black folks were not being passive.
Oh yeah, I know. Stepping out of line again. We have to put them down. Yeah.
So, but anyway,
we survived.
To segue from the 2018 100th anniversary of the Harlem Hellfighters. Please look them up, folk, and read about their exploits. In 2018, post-midterm elections, there are all kinds of positives and all kinds of negatives. And so we should do at least a little post-mortem. There at least one key race that I think we should talk about, and that's the gubernatorial race in the state of Georgia. And I don't know.
I don't know what the latest is on that. They were still counting the last I heard.
Off the top of my head, if you can call up what this late Thursday afternoon is, the last headline I read was Stacey Abrams, the black female candidate, was down approximately 68,000 votes, but there was still a large amount of untabulated mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, and provisional ballots that had not been counted. And because the percentages of the vote was something like 50.4 or 2 for her opponent, the Attorney General, who was basically charged by her and others with voter suppression, Mr. Kemp, he had about 50.2, and Stacey Abrams had 49 point something. And so if it's within a 0.5 differentiation, I think that triggers an automatic recount. And if it turns out that her vote tally increases to the point where he is at 49 point whatever and she's at 49 point whatever, and neither of them makes 50%, that becomes an automatic runoff election, which I believe, if you can find it on that search engine,
there's no
that
update.
would actually trigger a runoff election, I believe, in early December. So that's a crucial governor's race that we're waiting to see but she has not conceded.
She has not conceded, but Kemp is declaring that he has won.
Trying to,
but they're still counting.
If they're still counting, you can't declare a winner. So
well, he says he is.
And she,
but
somebody said they were the other night. Turned out that some Republicans,
there's a lot of
some Republicans declared they were the winner in one of those House seats.
Right.
The other person didn't concede, and guess what? All these other ballots came in. Turned out she's now in the lead, and will probably end up the Democrat being declared the winner. So people can claim being winners all the time.
Of course. And they can even print newspaper headlines, as in the case of Dewey back in 1947.
What can I tell you? The nature of the beast, though, is...
No, I was just going to say, I know we probably won't get to it today, but you know that CNN's press credentials were
that's
revoked yesterday, and we need to get into that because it started.
Let's talk about it. Here's the thing: if you can't find the Stacey Abrams latest numbers,
I can't. Nothing earlier than 22 hours ago.
Okay. So then, all right, the post-election news conference that was held not today but yesterday, which was Wednesday, which was the day after the election.
Yes.
The current occupant of the White House, the gentleman, the individual,
the guy who sits in the Oval Office,
the individual who came to power calling black and brown people rapists and murderers and whatever. He decided he'd hold another one of his long rambling press conferences at the White House, and there were two significant takeaways for me as a journalist, practicing journalist still. One was, as Raymond said, tell us about the confrontation with Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter.
Jim kept asking him these questions that he didn't want to answer. I mean, it doesn't matter what he was asking him about.
It was about the Russian investigation.
It was about the Russian investigation, ad nauseum. I'm so tired of talking about that. But the point is, Mr. Red didn't want to answer, and he called him rude because Acosta kept saying, "Mr. President, I'm asking you a question. Come on, give me an answer here." And so the guy at the podium is saying, "You're rude, you're fake news, we don't want you here," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Take the mic.
And and he had some young aide try and take the mic away from him.
Try to take the mic away.
And I watched that video. Later on, the White House claimed that they took his press credentials because he put his hands on the young lady that tried to take the microphone away from him. And that's why he was suspended. But that's not true. I saw the video. I saw it from both angles of the video. He never touched the woman. She touched him in her attempt to get the microphone away from him, but he never touched her. Another blatant lie by these people, and I don't like to talk about it because I can't contain myself. I get a little angry about this.
It's not so
you know,
much
you're a
about
better journalist than I am.
Not liking to talk about it. The nature of the beast is.
I get very excited when I talk about this guy.
So do I. But we can be fairly distancing to a certain degree.
I haven't called anybody any names.
There we go. So here's my takeaway on the fact that another lie came out of the White House, out of the president's office, out of his press secretary, who now trying to claim that Acosta manhandled or put his hands on the young lady. I tried to look at
any excuse to justify that
taking the credentials.
action. Right.
You understand? We looked at the video. I've looked at it myself, and I could see Acosta fending her off this way without
he was just
touching
her.
His
body.
That's
he
right.
Never touched her. Never touched her.
And I could see her trying to grab the mic.
Right. And she was all over him.
And she was very aggressive about, I'm getting this mic, and he was quite discreet about, no, you can't have my mic while I ask my question. So it was almost a comical dance, except it wasn't comical because these people were trying to shut down.
And I'm so glad that somebody, I forget the other report.
No. The entire press corps, including the Press Association president and a whole bunch of folk, and one of the conservative reporters actually said,
on the site.
Stop lying. Yeah. Yes, stop lying. And so, but part of their normal game plan is to lie about whatever they do.
Well, of course.
And so they lied in that instance again. But the second instance of press confrontation was when Yamiche Alcindor, who is a very competent reporter, White House press corps reporter for the PBS Evening News, basically asked him a question pertaining to the fact that he had declared himself a white nationalist, and was he not worried that by doing that he was giving aid and comfort to the white supremacists? Well, the orange guy in the White House did not want her to finish her question, so he interrupted her, and I think he called her, not rude, but he said, that's a very racist question. Your question is a very racist question.
It's a racist
pointing
question.
to her. How much more racist could I be? This was the thing. Why is my poll numbers so high among African Americans if I am giving aid and comfort to the white nationality? Why is my poll number so high? So he asked that question twice, and Yamiche wasn't even trying to debate his poll numbers. She wanted to get an answer to, are you giving aid and comfort? The interesting thing about that exchange was, later in the press conference, another news person said, excuse me, Mr. President, about those poll numbers that you were talking about, they're only 8%. It was the most hysterical follow-up to a press conference. The guy, you could hear the guy said, those poll numbers you were doubting, guess what? They're only 8%. So if he thinks 8%, I'm surprised it was as high as 8%.
You know, he probably has no idea what they are.
He didn't, but he would lie because he lied. If his lips move, he's lying.
He's lying.
Okay?
Yeah.
So those were the two key parts of that news conference that I thought he wants to call a working journalist doing her job properly a racist by calling her question a racist question, okay? He thinks he's being slick. That's a racist. You don't say you're a racist. That's a racist question. And then touts his great poll numbers in the African American community, which somebody fact-checked on the spot. Guess what? It's only 8%. So
I'm surprised these guys.
I was shocked when the guy came back with 8%. I was expecting it to be 2%, but that's okay.
Oh boy.
So now here's this whole bit about assaulting. As I said in that piece that I was putting out there for the anniversary, he's now calling the free press the enemy of the people, and people doing their jobs if he doesn't like the way the stories are being written, and we've been down this road before, he calls them fake news. And he actually turned around and insulted Acosta and said, CNN should be ashamed of hiring you and having you work because you're rude and you're the guy. There are two other things that I remember somewhere, whether it was today or yesterday, he actually got up and bald-faced said, I am the most moral leader. I'm the greatest moral leader. And the Twitter sphere lit up with that. The guy who quotes, he grabs them by their genitals when he feels like it, talks about he being the most moral, upstanding leader.
It's absurd.
It is bizarre.
You know, and I'm sorry. And I've said this continually. I still don't get it. I don't know why he's in the White House. I don't know how he continues to be in the White House. It's just mind-boggling.
Okay, because the bulk of the
bulk of the country, I have to remember I live on the East Coast,
on the electoral vote,
on the East Coast rather,
that he was able to garner in those red states areas.
I know. It's amazing
actually fall
to me.
for his line.
It's amazing to me what goes on in the interior of this country.
Well, the interesting thing is, people. My daughter gets to a point where she says, when you need to expect the expected. This is a quote I think she took from Melissa Harris Perry, which is, how people vote in the past tends to be how they vote
in the future.
In the present and probably in the future. And so don't be expecting something other than what you've seen before. And so that the target for that statement was, why would people expect white women to vote for Hillary Clinton just because Hillary Clinton was a white female candidate?
Right.
White women always voted for Republican males who they felt would protect their white privilege, and that's what was at stake in that election. White people's white privilege, because they were being threatened by these black, brown hordes and young people and whomever that was going to upset the status quo. And guess what? Melissa Harris Perry and herself, my daughter, who actually bought that line, and Michael Moore, who predicted that Trump would win, all of them were right. And us optimistic, even journalists who try reading signs, read the wrong signs. So that's why you're saying, I don't know why he's in the White House, and I'm saying,
still don't.
I know why he's in the White House, because we read the signs wrong. That's why. We keep expecting the unexpected when we should be expecting the expected.
I'm talking about basic humanity,
hey,
Eric. You know, where has the humanity gone in this country?
Okay, now you're talking about a rise in racist incidents, shootings.
Incidents, yes. Incidents.
No,
I don't
killings,
believe it.
Shootings.
Killings,
okay?
yes. The incidents.
So if you're getting a rise,
you're
getting a rise, what makes you think we're, you know?
I know. Well, we're going to have to take this up at some other point.
All right.
But
Next time.
I'm Raymond Peterson. And
I'm Eric Tait. This has been Media Watch. We'll catch you the next time.